There is an oft-circulated claim in the fandom that anime can't do horror, that the medium isn't scary because it's difficult to be afraid for a cartoon character's well-being, or similar faulty trains of thought. Across all mediums, horror is misunderstood. Many don't have a good definition. Genres in general are blended more and more every day, but horror in particular often gets the side-eye despite being so prevalent. If I ask someone if they like horror movies, more often than not, the likes of Friday the 13th or Saw pop into their heads. I have a friend who claimed they weren't into horror but then proceeded to enjoy Annihilation, Get Out, and It Chapter 1 not even months after stating as much. The delineation between the overarching term horror than the multitude of subgenres and styles isn't in the average lexicon. Gore porn like Hostel is different than a slasher such as Halloween, which is a far cry from the found footage-based psychological horror in the Blair Witch Project, which shares little with the likes of a creature feature a la The Host. Horror can be scary, but there are all types of scares, from the jumps of Paranormal Activity to the mind-twisting of The Lighthouse. Horror permeates countless genres because horror is an everyday thing. Not all of it has the threat of death, nor does it need to make you afraid of turning the lights out in your own home. It can be as simple as attending middle school, sitting in front of the class outcast, peering into yourself and witnessing a sea of flaws, thinking, if I'm hiding all of this, then what dark secrets does the delinquent hold? What of the seemingly perfect straight-A student? Such is deeply horror, and such is Aku no Hana. You're probably asking why talk about this 6-year-old anime that few folks enjoyed at the time of its airing. Well, recent news in the industry has spurred excitement for an upcoming horror title being directed by Hiroshi Nagahama. Best known for his work on Mushishi, Nagahama's directorial credits also include Aku no Hana. In fact, he's a key reason why the forthcoming adaptation of Junji Ito's magnum opus Uzumaki will be landing in 2020. You see, the king of horror manga recently had his work butchered in 2018 via the Junji Ito collection, a poorly animated, at times broken gathering of several short stories that unimaginatively pulled from Ito's work frame for frame, failing to capture what makes Ito's work so effective. A prime example of how not to handle an adaptation. Despite his prolific status in manga, Ito's work doesn't get as many adaptations as you might suspect, of a highly successful author that's been working for decades. Though I can't vouch for his opinion on collection, I have to imagine he maybe wants better. Apparently though, Ito is a big fan of Aku no Hana. Having a great respect for Nagahama, Ito has handed over the reins to the story of Kurozucho, a town that becomes obsessed with a single piece of geometry, to Lovecraftian ends. To understand exactly why Ito has so much faith, and why I do too, despite the difficulty of the source material, we have to take a look at Aku no Hana, the most underrated anime. Takao Kasuga is a typical sight in middle school, even if not the norm. He's the quiet kid that sits to the side, has a few friends, and spends most of his time on a single hobby that isn't popular amongst his peers. As a result, he thinks himself intellectually above most kids his age, though his mediocre grades don't reflect that. Nothing short of a superiority complex. At the same time, Kasuga has another problem. An unrequited love upon the class idol, straight-A student Nanako Saiki. Kasuga does what any middle school boy with little confidence in his social skills and an undeserved ego would do. He watches from afar, thinking, I deserve her. One day, he acts. Returning to class for a book he left behind, there he sees it. The item which will send his and the lives of many around him into a spiral. Saiki's gym uniform. Worse yet for Kasuga, the class miscreant, Sawa Nakamura, witnesses Kasuga's moral mishap. Hana ga saita yo. Hana ga. In a past video, I broke down why the first episode is so good, but there's more to unpack. A highlight of the direction, storyboarding, and shot composition right out of the gate is the scene of Kasuga's hometown as he walks to school in the morning. The realism to the backgrounds provides a level of minute detail that you just don't see in many TV productions. This is due in no small part to Studio Pablo, who specialize in this field. They've done the same for numerous anime over the years, most notably Devilman Crybaby, Evangelion 3.0, and a number of Trigger productions including Kill la Kill, Little Witch Academia, and Promare. Rusting metal shutters on closed-up shops and waterway railings, weather-worn buildings wasting away. Urban decay has gripped this forgotten town. Kasuga proceeds on his mundane walk to his mundane school life, with mundane conversations being had by those who share the graying streets. Plodding along as if in a trance, the banality of life creating tunnel vision, in which all that is visible is unremarkable. This scene, though, is played throughout the entirety of the show, adapting all the while, serving as a vibe check of sorts for Kasuga as the norm is shattered. The initial framing is integral to understanding Kasuga and his desire to travel over the mountains that loom upon all sides of his hometown. Much of this episode is cast in shadow, smothering what vibrant colors may exist as Kasuga cannot see them. The one place that is an exception to this is the bookstore, which is blanketed in sunlight. Warm and welcoming, a respite in a purposeless life. However, upon Nakamura's discovery of Kasuga's perversion, there are no such hallowed halls. Not in the old bookstore nestled into the streets of urban decay, not in the hearth of his home, nor in his book-drenched bedroom. Whatever semblance of normalcy Kasuga once possessed comes violently crashing down as Nakamura manipulates Kasuga for her own amusement and much deeper motivations, creating tension that strangles every second. Something the anime does better than the manga is the bending of reality, creating a horrific atmosphere that smothers its protagonist. All throughout the premiere, images of a black, wriggling being interject, crackling and snapping in ways that sound like some unnatural creature's dry bones piercing through its own crumbling skin, as it evolves into something most foul. It's an uneasy tension that leaves the audience wondering what awaits, culminating in the final minutes, which are nothing short of deeply uncomfortable. Kasuga's perpetual blank stare lights up as he reads the name on the gym bag. A fire of perversion ignites and a digital mutilization of a child's voice begins to mutter. The way the track layers in, it's unclear how real the flower and this demonic voice are. It's as if they're urging him to commit acts we are left to imagine as his focus singles out the object of his borderline religious obsession. Kasuga often refers to Psyche in literary terms such as femme fatale, terminology he wields somewhat incorrectly but does so in an attempt to seem smart, which makes Kasuga rather unlikable, even before his theft. Moments of decency, such as the time he berates a classmate for talking about Psyche in an incredibly lewd manner, or when he stands up for Nakamura when she gets accused of a crime she didn't commit, get undercut. Kasuga is meant to be broadly relatable to those who've played the roles of outcast, recluse, awkward, or so on. However, what sells his characterization is how badly we don't want to see ourselves in him. Inner thoughts of, if only Psyche knew I was such a scholar, then she would surely love me. Placing Psyche on a pedestal, creating an entirely separate persona in his head. Unrealistic expectations of her as being smarter, kinder, and purer than any other only backfire. He is nearly an incel in some of his views. When Nakamura makes friends with Psyche and claims that Psyche wants to have sex with Kasuga, he goes into denial, calling Psyche his Maria, aka his Blessed Virgin Mary, putting an over-evaluation upon purity. But the truth is, she's a pubescent teen girl. Sexual desires are to be expected and accepted. Aku no Hana isn't just a show about an arrogant teen boy. In nearly equal parts, it's about small-town life, societal expectations, perversion, and how our environment shapes us, putting forth the belief that the paths that appear before us only have so many permutations. Even if someone like Nakamura tries so desperately not to just rattle the cage but break it. It's how these themes are explored which separate Aku no Hana from many similar stories. The class delinquent's relationship with Kasuga is complicated and messy. The show never explicitly states that she has mental health issues, something akin to bipolar disorder, but there are hints throughout the 13 episodes and the manga further suggests so. Clearly, Kasuga also struggles with depression. The two exacerbate each other's mental health problems by leaning into their own and encouraging each other's worst tendencies, all in an effort to break down their town of shitbugs. These kids aren't equipped to understand or handle any of this, which is where much of the great drama, unnerving tension, horror, and interludes of beauty come from. One such instance occurs in the 7th episode. Having forced Kasuga to go on his date with Psyche while wearing her gym uniform underneath his clothes, the pair hits a breaking point. Kasuga has been struggling up until this point to resist Nakamura's manipulation and to understand his own perversions. What follows is a prime example of how the anime elevates the source material to something splendid. Imagine with me for a second here that I'm an editor at some manga publication. Shuzo Oshimi hands me his first storyboards and pitches me on Aku no Hana. I'm really excited. It's a great concept. The art is solid, and there's a presence of social horrors similar to that of my favorite manga author Inio Asano's Oyasumi Pum Pum. But I urge Oshimi to push a little more. Find the moments that would benefit from lingering panels, punch up some of the faces, especially that of Kasuga, who through the first collection has mostly the same reaction face to any number of emotions. Maybe make him look a little less like an average anime boy and more of an average boy. It just needs that last little something extra to take the manga from good to exceptional. Now, it does eventually get there, but only after a few dozen chapters. The anime, meanwhile, covers the first 20 of the 57 chapter story and nails practically every single second from the get-go. Most notably, the scene I just played and the events immediately after. In the manga, Kasuga's mental breakdown, the destruction of the classroom, and the euphoric pleasure of Nakamura plays out with little flair. It's these events conveyed in standard panels, divided by smaller, chaotic close-ups. Some of those larger panels highlight my dislike of Kasuga's design. Hokey posing and facial reactions throughout. He looks too comedic. There are some nice panels and layouts though, the side-by-side of Kasuga and Nakamura's faces, as they revel in their wanton destruction, met by this spread after the turn of a page, pretty good. However, it doesn't wallow in the mayhem. Their enjoyment, dismay, relief, or the anxiety which comes afterwards. Meanwhile, the anime takes 4 minutes of slow-mo debauchery with chalk twirling through the air, ink slowly soaking into their skin and clothes. Nakamura dances upon the desk in a delirious high. All the while, unnerving music plays. Then Nagahama and the staff at Zex have the guts to begin the next episode with 5 minutes of Kasuga and Nakamura slowly strolling through the streets of their dying town. The new day dawning while they hold hands, silently sauntering. Melancholy music reverberates, while they contemplate what will come of this new life. One where the facades they've put up for society's sake are torn off. The direction is superb. Shots sit for 30 seconds to a full minute, letting the reality of what these two just committed sink in. There's an air of intimacy, like that of young lovers losing their virginities together, but combined with elements of post-apocalyptic despondency. Only slowly breaking that with birds chirping and the music gently fading. There's this really complex notion hanging over the whole scene. To Kasuga and Nakamura, the act which they just committed is monumental. Earth-shattering. They'll never see the sunrise in the same light. Always to reminisce over the delirious debauchery. They're caught up in the moment and fail to recognize reality. That those times where we feel like we've morphed into an entirely different being are often met with a familiar order. Change isn't a moment. It's a long drawn-out process that doesn't always happen as rapidly as we desire, particularly in the case of selfhood. Nakamura, still in shock, kills the silence when she says, "Well, I live this way." After everything these two have been through, Kasuga still knows little about the girl he just destroyed the world with. A wondrous snap back to reality, and now he's going to have to deal with it all. The looks of disgust from his classmates and friends. The disappointment and shame of his parents. And worse yet, Psyche's hatred. Kasuga wanted change. He's getting it. And it turns out, how the world reforms around actions isn't as in our hands as we'd like to believe. Meanwhile, what I just described plays out in the manga within a handful of panels. The desire to run from one's hometown isn't an uncommon one in media or real life. I too am someone who, during a low, decided to move away from the place I called home for 25 years. 2 years on, doing so has been a decidedly wise decision, but that feeling of being trapped hasn't completely disappeared. While I have little attachment to my new home of Dayton, so much of this area reminds me of Kasuga's hometown. The Midwest has suffered quite a bit at the hands of economic downturn. Driving around, there are so many abandoned strip malls, housing complexes, and apartments that have received little care from their governing bodies. Work opportunities are limited, and chances are, if you manage to afford college and get a viable degree, you'll have to move to make use of it. Dayton has been hit nearly as hard as any place in America in regards to the exploitation of factory work and the inability to adapt. How such an environment here in the US, across the Pacific and Japan, and frankly all over the globe creates a sense of relatable horror should be no surprise. The towns which I resided in southern New Jersey for the first 25 years of my life are in better shape, but when you grow up in such a small place with small views, you grasp for a grander scope all the harder. It's easy to feel trapped, to see the same events occur day in and day out. You graduate, they play Eve 6's Here's to the Night, and yeah, life changes, but the ways in which things stay the same are just as big. Routine turns from comfort to stagnation. As Kasuga slowly peels back why Nakamura is the way she is, I only feel a deep sympathy. She's the product of a broken home as her parents divorced young, though it's important to note the juxtaposition with that of Kasuga's home life doesn't frame divorce as a wholly negative thing. The mental health of Nakamura is not framed as a result of single parenthood or any singular influence. There's a multitude that crop up in how the small town wants to make no big deal out of youthful indiscretions. 3 vulnerable kids who need help are left to have the events of their mountainside meeting fester. Nakamura's father raises his hands in defeat, acknowledging the bad influence label placed upon his child and apologizes. Kasuga's mother takes it out on herself, saying her and her husband are bad parents. His father gives some random advice about not making mothers cry. Presumably, Psyche's parents agree to keep quiet alongside the school and the law for the sake of preserving the child's perfect image. She isn't so perfect though. She's as deeply human as Kasuga and Nakamura. Initially, her positive attitude towards Kasuga seems like puppy love. In actuality, she's obsessive. When Psyche catches up to Kasuga and Nakamura during their climactic escape from town, upon the rain-soaked mountain slope, Psyche reveals how damaged she actually is. She doesn't care that Kasuga sexually harassed her. She was just happy that someone was interested. She's jealous and equally inspired by his gushing during their date in the bookshop. He so shamelessly exposes his love for books. She wants to be that person, to open up and not give a damn what anyone thinks. So, rotoscoping. A decision that benefited the craft but not the bottom line. As someone who obviously considers Aku no Hana to be tremendous, I'm left frustrated by the reaction to the anime. The community at large wrote it off before ever watching a single episode. As a fool who has no qualms with subjecting himself to all sorts of negativity, I've read a lot of takes. And honestly, most read like they're from someone who has little understanding of how animation works, claiming low frame rates or curiously calling the facial animation lacking in expression. Just a general sense that this isn't traditional, so it's ugly. To which I say, hey, a lot of people who like anime are incredibly ignorant of the medium. I mean, look at how widely accepted and passed around this misinformed take by one of the most prominent AniTubers was for weeks. It took numerous knowledgeable anime critics and animators to discredit it before the original source retracted their statement. If it seems like I'm angry, I kinda am. Remarks like "the faces are expressionless" bother me because I see the incredible acting by Maria Issei and the animators responsible for adapting her and am befuddled. The reductive take would be, this could just be live action, and yes, the Aku no Hana story could be made into live action, and it has, and it requires less theatrical flair than Attack on Titan, Dragon Ball Z, or even Death Note. However, that would be a great discredit to the staff. The character designers that tweaked Nakamura into a less cute anime girl who's cute for the sake of making manga covers like so, of the colorist who set the mood of every frame, and those composing each shot, deciding what stays, what goes, and what gets added in. I cannot stress enough how terrifying Nakamura is. Glaring with ill intent, dominating a frame, the way she voices herself in such a guttural and raw fashion that conveys her abusive nature and vulnerability is so earnest. How the animation supports that. It's also very raw in a way that traditional means of animation don't often capture. This is a very real story about the very real ways that people can become so very ugly. And not gussing that up with the traditional styles of anime and manga, I think serves to benefit the themes. There's something to be said about the expectations of how people react to the subversions in Aku no Hana. The horror comes via breaking from an expected reality to show us a likely one. Kasuga isn't a good kid. It doesn't take much for misguided souls like his to be twisted into something unsafe unsightly. Where I often malign television for taking a soap opera approach where every episode has to have several small twists leading to some grand cliffhanger, Aku no Hana manages to do so. It builds anticipation, lets us put our guard down, then shoves the ugly truth in our face. It makes us feel guilty for those we've mistreated and ostracized, presents a terror of what waits on the other side if we are to ever break from the tedious comfort of everyday life. Afraid of what others desire from us. The feigned smile a loved one gives to us as they casually lie and commit the unthinkable outside our line of sight. What a friend gets up to in the solitude of their own home. Of all the monsters we tuck away. It's cynical, but there's a drop of truth to it. At the end of the day, we likely will never get another season of Aku no Hana. Nakahama spoke to why the anime ends with a series of scrambled flash forwards, and he expressed that it was all in the service of showing the dedication he and the staff had towards this adaptation. That they believe in it with a full heart, and hope they'll be given the chance to follow through someday. Unfinished anime are not uncommon. Many of my favorites fall victim to such. March Comes In Like a Lion, Made in Abyss, Hoseki no Kuni, Berserk, Nana, Baby Steps, and Hunter x Hunter to name a few. But Aku no Hana stings worse. The ways in which it elevated from a manga that starts off solid and becomes great in the last 2/5 to the outright stellar from the get-go are rare. To see the black and white approach of the upcoming Uzumaki adaptation, and no, Nakahama lets his art directors have creative free range, but such can come at the cost of an audience. How he implements something as simple as a Dutch angle to a teenage girl's room to make it feel like an ethereal space go unappreciated because people just don't like change, which is unsurprisingly rather antithetical to Nakahama's ethos. At the Raleigh, North Carolina convention, Animazement in 2013, Nakahama expressed that he too was unsure if rotoscoping was the right choice. However, in a sea of shows produced by the anime medium that leave little lasting impact, he rather chased something uncertain than creative conservatism. And I really want to know how they would adapt the uncomfortable events which take place between the end of the anime and the time jump in the manga. Which is to say, there is some really rough material in there ranging from panty theft to much, much worse. All of which comes across in the manga as rather awful, but I just keep wondering, what if? Even more so, I'd love to see the approach towards the very divergent latter portions. Because as cynical and edgy as Aku no Hana starts, it becomes the story of how we recover from the harm we commit upon ourselves. The question of not only if forgiveness from others is possible, but if rebirth through forgiveness of ourselves is. Because otherwise, we just putrefy in the same horrific stagnation that caused Saiki, Nakamura, and Kasuga so much pain. As always, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and consider donating to my Patreon. That is by far the best way to ensure videos like this keep on coming. As you might guess, a nearly 25-minute video does take me a while. Any amount you can give to make that financially worth my while is deeply appreciated. So, to everyone who has supported me in some fashion, thank you.